All right, the Russian Sphinx. Every age has its riddle. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky was the enigma of the 19th century. The publication of her letters and also those of Mahatmas Moria and Kut Humi cast a new and fuller light upon her extraordinary personality. She is revealed as a woman in the memory of the living, not as a half-mythical Sibyl from some distant age or the Pythia of some ancient oracle. Though but a few decades have passed since Madame Blavatsky departed from this life, hers is already a name to conjure with. She is the third person of a bewildering triad, Saint Germain, Cagliostro, and Blavatsky. As though by common consent humanity attacks viciously and relentlessly anyone who assails the infallibility of the mediocre, dare to preach or even presume the order reigns behind the chaos of life, that anything in the universe other than man has intelligence, and an outraged society shows its claws, but partially hidden by the semblance of its culture. Oppose the knowledge of the few to the ignorance of the many, and Mormons are provoked to a frenzy of resentment. A large portion of mankind has been baptized in the faith of the commonplace. Stupidity is the vogue, and all men dread to be out of style. The fear is not that the occultist may be wrong, the fear is that the occultist may be right. To the criminal we may give the benefit of the doubt, to the occultist never. The criminal violates only our laws, the occultist violates our sacred opinions. Like children incapable of the emotions of maturity, we are pitifully deficient in our grasp of spiritual values, indifferent to the light given us and the effects made for the improvement. We permit our petty ambitions to overshadow higher issues. We tolerate every form of error, but are utterly intolerant of truth. We are generous towards any state but that of wisdom, which, when recognized, we swear to destroy occultism. No, swear to destroy. Occultism is regarded as a synonym for imposture, and the philosopher can hardly expect a better fate than hemlock or the rude in an age when the learned are too busily engaged in condemnation even to investigate the objects of their ire. Misunderstanding is, for the most part, lack of understanding. This is particularly true in the world's attitude towards Madame Blavatsky. She fearlessly voiced beliefs that contemporary thinkers dared not entertain, even in the sanctum sanctorum of their own souls. One materialistic scientist voiced the scorn of all his tribe when he declared that the 19th century began in science but ended in superstition. He fails to explain how it was that so noble a beginning came to so sorry an end. The closing quarter of the last century witnessed a metaphysical revolt against the crassness of the physical science fascinated by phenomena. Lost in the effort to ascertain whether man ascended or descended from the ape, learning became so absorbed in determining where he had come from that it had no time left to perceive either where we are going or how we are to get there. To many scientists, religion is linked with superstition, and Newton is the only true avatar of force or matter, depending upon the school. The sophists, industriously building their structure of facts upon premises, have overlooked, however, certain equations in human nature. They forget that men grow more rapidly from the contemplation of ideals than from the memorization of scientific dogma. Reduced to famine straits by the emptiness of scientific thought, the soul hunger even present in human nature demands a more nutritive food. If the occult sciences be classed as heresies by the solists, the latter have only themselves to blame, for if material learning had not relegated God to the limbo of discarded notions, it would not be necessary for men and women of heroic vision to rise up and reinstate the Creator upon his universal throne. Upon the night of July 30th, 1831, at Inslav, H.P. Blavatsky, then Mademoiselle Hahn, was ushered into the world amidst coffins and desolation due to the plague of cholera then raging throughout Europe. As an omen, this circumstance was further augmented by the strange fact that the robes of the Greek Catholic priest hastily called for the baptism caught fire during the ceremony, and several persons were more or less seriously burned. From the records of the Hahn family, we learned that the child, from her tenderest years, was constantly in an atmosphere of curious legends and peasant fancies. Russian folklore is rendered so rich and vivid by contact with Asiatic traditions that she could not recall a time when she did not possess not only a firm belief in the existence of superphysical worlds with their supermundane inhabitants, but a somewhat accurate concept of the roles enacted by these invisible beings in the lives of mortals. Such environmental conditions during these impressionable years released the occult potentialities, thus preparing a suitable foundation for that which was to follow. From her earliest childhood, writes her aunt, she was unlike any other person, very lively and highly gifted, full of humor and most remarkable daring. She struck everyone with astonishment by her self-willed and determined actions. Her restless and very nervous temperament, one that led her into most unheard of, ungirlish mischief, her unaccountable, especially in those days, attraction to, and at the time, fear of the dead, her passionate love and curiosity for everything unknown and mysterious, weird and fantastic, and foremost of all, her craving for independence and freedom of action, a craving that nothing and no one could control. All this combined with an exuberance of imagination and a wonderful sensitiveness ought to have warned her friends that she was an exceptional creature to be dealt with and controlled by means as exceptional. Each passing year found Mademoiselle Hahn a more stormy vortex of occult forces. She moved in an atmosphere of unrealities, and in her presence nothing seemed impossible. In her temperament were mingled the profundity of a Merlin and the mischief of a Puck. It was as though a troop of sprites were in constant attendance, ever mindful of her bidding. Her uncanny prophetic powers by turns amazed and discomfited visitors for looking them intently in the face, like some pythoness of Delphi. In half-formed childish words, she would solemnly predict the place and time of their death. A.P. Sinnett has noted that her prognostications were so correct that she became the terror of the domestic circle. Nothing can be concealed from her that she desired to know. She could read the most hidden thoughts and motives and was insistently aware of circumstances occurring at a distance. Her aunt adds that the little mystic was both somnambulistic and somniloquent. She would hold in her sleep long conversations with unseen personages, some of which were amusing, some edifying, some terrifying for those who gathered about the child's bed. On various occasions, while apparently in an ordinary sleep, she would answer questions put by her persons who took hold of her hand about lost property or other subjects of momentary anxiety, as though she were a sibyl entranced. Those acquainted with the mysteries of the invisible worlds realized that the mediumistic Mademoiselle Hahn would have been swirled to her destruction by the forces of the astral light had she not been protected and overshadowed by a strength and intelligence greater than her own. In later years, Madame Blavatsky herself commented upon this, declaring that in every crisis of her life she sensed an imminent protection. On several occasions, she was saved from almost certain death by the ministrations of an unseen friend, the significance of whose protection was not to be fully understood until future years. Among the strange forces and entities which intruded themselves upon her sensitive psychic organism was one utterly different from the rest, and which remained constant to the end. At times she sensed the almost continuous presence of a tall, majestic, white-robed figure whose great benign eyes gazed down upon her. The glorious Oriental, luminous in his astral nature, was the master of her dreams, and the passing years brought the ever-increasing conviction that when the time was ripe, she would come to know objectively this adept whose influence had so definitely molded the substances of her subjective life. How long has that been? 10 minutes. Hold on. Let me just check something. Finish this page. The year 1851 was of extraordinary significance to the Russian mystic. Madame Blavatsky was now 20 years of age and was visiting in London during the seasons of the International Exposition. She had already broken the bonds of family and country and stood at the very threshold of her adventurous life. As she was walking with her father one day, she saw an approaching number of Orientals, part of a group at the time visiting the court of Queen Victoria. In the midst of the Hindus was one of surpassing height and dignity. As her eyes turned towards him, a wave of astonishment swept over her. Her heart almost stopped beating, for she recognized in this Hindu of grave demeanor and strange protector of her childhood visions, the one whose glorious countenance had shone down upon her from the invisible worlds. Her first impulse was to rush forward to speak to him, to fall at his feet, but with princely gesture he bade her remain where she was and give no sign. So, helpless under the spell of his power, she stood still until he passed by. To the uninitiated, the handsome Oriental was merely a Rajput prince, but to Madame Blavatsky he was the Master Moria, one of the world's great souls and an adept of the Trans-Himalayan Brotherhood, whose members are dedicated to the service of spiritual needs of mankind. It was the evening following her first physical meeting with Mahatma M. that Madame Blavatsky, impelled by a force she could not then understand, strolled slowly through Hyde Park. She was lost in reverie, turning over and over in her mind the almost unbelievable adventure of the day. Suddenly she looked up, and there before her stood the very person who had formed the subject of her reverie. Madame Blavatsky was a creature of destiny, and as the steel is drawn to the lodestone, so the Russian mystic was impelled by fate into the way prepared for her. In London, by the Serpentine, wrote Madame Blavatsky in her diary, I met the master of my dreams. Concerning the Rajput adept, very little information is available. Although known to Madame Blavatsky as the Mahatma Moria, he seems to have also used the name Ahazalama, or the Blue Teacher, according to the conservative records of that day, was 125 years of age at the time of his visit to England. The portrait of Mahatma Moria, here published for the first time, was painted under the direction of Madame Blavatsky, who seems to have been satisfied with the accuracy of the likeness. The Mahatma visited Paris in the later part of the 19th century and was also in America for a short time. He traveled, however, in great secrecy, accompanied by Oriental attendants, and met but a few people. 3 years before her meeting with Mahatma M., Mademoiselle Han, when a girl of 17, was married on a dare to General Nicephor Blavatsky, who gave his age as 50, but who was probably considerably older. They remained together for 3 tempestuous months, at the end of which the high-spirited young woman gathered up her belongings and departed for Tiflis. Her marriage is only significant in that she gained therefrom the name that was to become the most important in the field of modern occultism. Then began a period of wandering over approximately 10 years, during which time the young countess, forced onward by her craving for knowledge and adventure, visited the most inaccessible corners of the earth. Her travels carried her through Central Asia, India, South America, Africa, and Eastern Europe. At one time, she was exploring the ruins of the Mayan civilization at Chichen Itza and Uxmal. At another, delving into the archives of the library of the Tashi Lama in the grim old monastery of Tashi Lunpo. According to Sepharil, she was wounded 5 times while in some way involved in the fortunes of Garibaldi in Italy. She also attended secret voodoo meetings in the Negro district of New Orleans, examined the rites of the dervishes and the druses, and was presumably initiated into the latter order, and explored the mysteries of the Yamabushi of Japan. In the early 50s, she revisited the United States and crossed the Rocky Mountains to San Francisco in an immigrant train. From Java and the Straits settlements to Berlin, Vienna, and Paris, traces can be found of her search during this entire period for those fragments of ancient and forgotten truths which, when organized by the light which came to her in later life, became the foundation of her amazing literary works.